This is an ABC News special report. The Mueller Report. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
Good afternoon. We're coming on the air right now because Special Counsel Robert Mueller has completed the Russia investigation and delivered his report to the Justice Department. Mueller, appointed by the Deputy Attorney General back in May 2017 after the firing of FBI Director James Comey, is charged to determine if Russians conspired to interfere in our election, if President Trump or anyone in his campaign joined that conspiracy, and if President Trump obstructed justice by interfering with the investigation. His final report now in the hands of Attorney General William Barr. Congress has been notified, and our Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas is in Washington with the latest on this breaking news. Pierre.
George, after 22 months, one of the most consequential investigations in modern history, really since Watergate, is now coming to a close. And a confidential report detailing the special counsel's work is now in the hands of Attorney General William Barr, who has some huge decisions to make. Namely, how much of Robert Mueller's report can be turned over to Congress? How much can be made public? We've just been informed that Barr has sent that letter to Congress notifying leaders that Mueller has completed the work and that Barr will begin reviewing the report and deciding what can be released. So the intensity of anticipation now goes into hyperdrive as we wait to find out what Mueller has uncovered and what he thinks should be done about it, George.
Still waiting to see what's in that letter. Let's review what Robert Mueller has done to date. 22-month investigation, as you said. $25 million spent, 37 indictments, more than 24 of those Russians who were indicted for their conspiracy to hack the DNC emails and have them leaked out through WikiLeaks. More importantly for President Trump, several of his associates indicted were pleading guilty, including his former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, false statements to the FBI, his former campaign chairman Paul Manafort, facing several years in prison now for tax fraud, foreign reporting violations. He pled guilty as well. George Papadopoulos, foreign policy advisor in the campaign, also pled guilty for false statements. Rick Gates, the deputy campaign chair in the campaign, still cooperating with Robert Mueller. And, of course, President Trump's former lawyer and fixer Michael Cohen, now facing jail time as well. His having to do with the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels, also financial fraud. Roger Stone, close Trump associate, indicted as well. I want to go to Cecilia Vega, our senior White House correspondent here. Cecilia, the president, despite those findings right there, has called this consistently a witch hunt and a hoax.
Practically every day, there has been a steady drumbeat of outrage from this president since day one, since this investigation was launched 22 months ago, really to the point of obsession. You know, the New York Times says that President Trump has blasted and publicly attacked the Russia investigation, Mueller's investigation, nearly 1,100 times. Those attacks in recent months have become angrier. They have become more frequent. They have become more personal. He talked about it in his State of the Union. He used profanity when talking about it to a group of conservatives recently. The strategy from President Trump from day one has been to create this deep state narrative, to really cast a shadow on Robert Mueller, even before this report came out. That could potentially backfire. As you and I know, most of Washington agrees Robert Mueller in this investigation has been above board. They have been a tightly run ship, leak-proof, right down until today when this report
right up until 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Let me also bring in our chief White House correspondent, John Carl. John, in that letter, Barr says that Mueller has said he has completed the work. That means, apparently, no more indictments in the Mueller investigation. He has sent the report.
No more indictments coming from the special counsel, but George, remember, the special counsel has referred prosecutions to the Southern District of New York, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. There could be further indictments coming from there, but nothing more coming from the special counsel. They will close shop, ending a pivotal chapter in this investigation, George.
And the big question now is what happens next? What happens with Attorney General Barr with the report? What does he do with the report? What does he release to Congress and the public? John, yesterday you asked the president what he thought about that. I want to show his answer.
Mr. President, does the American public have a right to see the Mueller report?
I don't mind. I mean, frankly, I told the House, if you want, let them see it. Again, I say, a deputy, because of the fact that the Attorney General didn't have the courage to do it himself, a deputy that's appointed appoints another man to write a report. Let it come out. Let people see it. That's up to the Attorney General. We have a very good Attorney General. He's a very highly respected man, and we'll see what happens. But it's sort of interesting that a man out of the blue just writes a report.
Despite the president's wishes, that does not mean the report will be public. Here's what the Attorney General, William Barr, said at his confirmation hearings about that.
Will you commit to making any report Mueller produces at the conclusion of his investigation available to Congress and to the public?
As I said in my statement, I am going to make as much information available as I can, consistent with the rules and regulations that are part of the special counsel regulations.
Will you commit to making any report on the obstruction of justice public?
That's the same answer.
Thank you.
Dan Abrams, our chief legal analyst here as well. That answer does not mean the report is necessarily going to be public.
No, not at all. And if you actually read the regulations, it says the Attorney General may determine that public release of these reports would be in the public interest to the extent that release would comply with applicable legal restrictions. So it's basically saying it's in the hands of the Attorney General to decide whether A, it's in the public interest, and then B, are there any legal hurdles to overcome here? Also, one other thing to note. A lot of people talking about the fact that now the Southern District has work to do, the D.C. Circuit as well. But remember, all of these departments ultimately report to William Barr. And if there's any very controversial case, they're going to go to the Attorney General for sign-off before any future indictments happen. So it is still a very different process when it comes to the special counsel who's effectively working independently versus the Southern District of New York, et cetera.
But one of the things we know about what the special counsel has done is he has spun off this work to other districts, and there could have been spin-offs that we don't know about.
Absolutely. There could be a lot that we don't know about. All we know today is that it seems Robert Mueller has concluded his work. It seems Robert Mueller has done what he is required to do under the special counsel regulations, and that is hand the Attorney General this report. There are specific requirements in here about specific things that he has to address, et cetera. All of that is now done. Now it's up to the Attorney General to effectively create his own report and determine what's going on.
And I want to go to Pierre Thomas for more on that. The question is now, Pierre, what is the process the Attorney General is going to go through in these next days and weeks?
Well, George, it will be a fairly lengthy process to go through the report and figure out what can be made public. But there's some hints as to whether we will get some kind of summary from the Attorney General much faster than that. According to the letter, he says, Mr. Barr says, I am reviewing the report and anticipate that I may be in a position to advise you of the special counsel's principal conclusions as soon as this weekend. So that is very important news right there, George. We may get some kind of summary of the basic conclusions of Bob Mueller very soon.
That is more quickly than we anticipated, Pierre, isn't it?
Yeah, in terms of the conclusions, what he's making a distinction here that, look, in terms of the overall details of the report, there may be much of that I need to keep out of the public view. But in terms of his basic conclusions, some of that I can make known to the public very soon, George.
Okay, let's go to Mary Bruce up on Capitol Hill, our senior congressional correspondent as well. Mary, the Congress is going to want all of the details.
George, short of the full report and the underlying evidence, Democrats have made very clear here that they are not going to be satisfied, and they're going to use every tool at their disposal to try and get this information. That includes subpoenas. That includes possibly bringing Mueller himself up here to testify, and it could include going to court to try and get some of that underlying evidence. Democrats here are quick to point out that they feel there is precedent here. But, George, this could be a very long, protracted fight, and that's why you are seeing Democrats here not waiting for them to get Mueller's full report. They are plowing ahead. They've made very clear that they're going to continue their robust investigations while they also try and essentially recreate Mueller's findings. It's also important to remember, George, that Congress has a very different mandate from Robert Mueller. While he has been looking into criminal intent, the Hill is focused on abuses of power, a much broader range here, and they are continuing that work while also making very clear they're going to do everything they can to get the full Mueller report and the underlying evidence.
Dan Abrams, another significant piece of news from William Barr here, saying there were no instances in the Mueller probe where Mueller was denied a step he wanted to take. That was significant because if he did do that, he'd have to tell Congress.
That's right. One of the things we knew that would have to be disclosed was if there was ever a time where Robert Mueller said, I want to do this, I want to indict someone, I want a subpoena, and that the Attorney General or the Attorney General's office had basically said no. He's now stating that did not happen. Now, when we hear that the principal conclusions could be released as early as this weekend, that may not tell us much. I mean, all that may say is there were no other indictments that we don't know about. That could be it, which is Robert Mueller concluded that the following people ought to be indicted, all of which we know about. Robert Mueller concluded that no other indictments were appropriate. And that may be the extent of the quote-unquote principal conclusions that are released this weekend.
I want to bring in Chris Christie as well, former federal prosecutor, governor of New Jersey, also has worked very closely with President Trump, and Robert Mueller. Your impressions as he completes his work?
Well, listen, George, I think this is emblematic of what Mueller has done all along. The fact that nobody knew this was really coming. Nobody knows exactly what's in there. Bob Mueller has run a professional prosecuting office from the day he opened it until today, the day he closes it. And I think he's to be commended for that. Secondly, what I'd say also is that I think one of the reasons that Bill Barr may, in fact, be ready to give some summation of certain conclusions that Bob Mueller reached is, given their relationship that goes back, now 25 years or more, I can't imagine that Bob Mueller has not discussed these conclusions before dropping this report on the Attorney General's desk with the Attorney General and giving him an idea of what's going on. So it's not going to be like Bill Barr is starting from scratch and has to go to page 1 of the report and start reading to do that. So I think you got to remember the personal relationship between Barr and Mueller. They've worked together before. They know each other well. High level of trust, I suspect. And I think Bill Barr knows a lot more about this report a couple of days ago than people may have suspected.
Okay, Chris Christie, thanks very much. John Carl, we're getting some initial response from the president's legal team.
Yeah, the president's legal team has put out a statement, George, saying we're pleased that the Office of Special Counsel has delivered its report to the Attorney General pursuant to the regulations. Attorney General Barr will determine the appropriate next steps. That's from Rudy Giuliani and Jay Sekulow, the president's two principal lawyers on this. But the president was out attacking Barr in an interview that aired this morning, George, saying that if he, attacking Robert Mueller and the special counsel, saying that if he in any way questions his election victory with this final report, quote, the people will not stand for it. So the president's war on what he has repeatedly called a witch hunt has gone up right until the final moments of this special counsel investigation.
And Terry Moran, our senior national correspondent, that war has had some impact on the standing of Robert Mueller, at least the public standing of Robert Mueller over the course of this investigation.
It really has. In a polarized country where every question gets tossed into this political dogfight that we have over pretty much everything, the polls show, as you say, that trust in Robert Mueller has declined primarily among Republicans. He's getting hammered day after day in conservative media and by the President of the United States. That said, the manner in which he conducted this investigation, as you've spoken about, will no doubt, to most fair-minded people, raise his poll numbers. He's done it relatively quickly in absolute silence, not getting into the political mud fight. And we do know a couple of things now, concrete things, as you've just been talking about. He had free rein. No one stopped him from going in any direction. Not Rod Rosenstein, not Acting Attorney General Matthew Whitaker, not William Barr. He has had free rein. And second, if you go back to his original assignment, he was appointed in order to investigate any links and or coordination between the Russian government and individuals associated with the campaign of Donald Trump. Well, in the indictments he's already brought, and he's not going to bring any more, there was little to no evidence of any coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. Not in the Manafort case, not in the Stone case. We just haven't seen it at this point. So it's possible that we will learn a conclusion, the broad conclusion, very quickly, which is that there was no collusion.
That there was no American, no Trump associate who cooperated with the conspiracy that the Russians were engaged in right there. And that would, Dan Abrams, bolster one of the points that President Trump has been making throughout this 22 months.
Right. And remember that the initial mandate was not about Donald Trump. It was about campaign, anyone involved in the Trump campaign. Were there any collusion with the Russians between them and anyone in the Trump campaign? And look, you have to say that if it turns out that there is no indictment that alleges any conspiracy between anyone in the Trump campaign and the Russians, that vindicates the president to some degree. That doesn't mean there was nothing that nothing was done wrong. It doesn't mean there's not potential obstruction of justice, but it does vindicate the fundamental claim about collusion with the Russians when it comes to the fundamental indictment of the 12 and 13 Russians for hacking and for the
I
distribution.
guess one of the questions would be, what is the standard for an indictment? Because if the reason were, and we don't know the reason, if the reason were that no action was taken against the president is because the Justice Department has determined that a president can't be indicted.
Well, that would be different, right? That would be different. If the reasoning is we've got him, but he's the president, and therefore we can't indict him, that's not a vindication.
But we may not know that.
We might not, but I would think that Robert Mueller has indicated that in his report. Whether that becomes public or not is a separate question. But if the reason that the president was not indicted is because he's the president, or if Mueller simply says he's the president, as a result, we can't even seek to indict, that's not a vindication. But if there is a more thorough report which says that there wasn't enough evidence, that again, one of the things that they have to explain is declinations to indict, and if the explanation there says we declined to indict because there wasn't evidence of a conspiracy.
Vindication for the president.
Yeah, that's a vindication.
We're getting some more response from the White House right now. Sarah Sanders has sent out a tweet. Let's put it up on the screen. Cecilia Vega, what do we have here?
The next steps, she writes, the next steps are up to the Attorney General Barr, and we look forward to the process taking its course. The White House has not received or been briefed on the special counsel report. And we sort of knew this going in. We also know that they were preparing for this, that they'd had multiple statements ready to go, depending on what Mueller delivered today, that the White House lawyer is traveling with the president down in Mar-a-Lago right now. The White House special counsel is also traveling down with the presidents in Florida. They've been preparing for this. From the people that I've talked to in the White House, from the people our team have talked to in the White House, they weren't necessarily worried or nervous about this Mueller report. I think the nerves and the fear for potentially what comes next is with all of these other investigations, the spin-offs that have come with this.
John Carl, though, potential sigh of relief, if indeed no more indictments, sigh of relief for Jared Kushner, for Don Jr., the president's son, Don Jr., who a lot of Democrats believed were vulnerable on perhaps false statements to Congress and others.
A sigh of relief from the White House and perhaps some frustration on the part of Democrats that we're expecting something big coming at the end of this, an indictment of one of those people very close to the president. But, George, 2 points on that. One, important to point out, as you did, the people close to the president that have already been indicted as part of this, including his campaign chairman, his national security advisor, his personal lawyer, and the fact that the investigations continue. The special counsel investigation is over, but you still have criminal investigations, multiple criminal investigations, including perhaps most importantly the one out of the Southern District of New York, but also congressional Democrats just getting started in their investigation. So perhaps a sigh of relief here at the White House, but they know that they're still very much under fire and under attack.
Mary Bruce, getting more reaction from Capitol Hill?
Yeah, George, we're hearing from the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner. He is calling for Congress to immediately see this report and also for the declassified version to immediately be made public. He says nothing short of that will suffice. We're also hearing from the response from the first Democratic presidential contender, Senator Cory Booker, says that the report should be made public immediately. And George, there is agreement on both sides to that. Remember, we did have nearly all House Republicans side with Democrats supporting a resolution here in the House to make this report public. That was largely a symbolic effort meant to increase pressure on the Attorney General. That measure was killed in the Senate by one of the president's top allies, Senator Lindsey Graham. But it is worth noting that both sides feel that it is important that this report be made public. Democrats obviously have many political reasons why they want to get to the bottom of this, but Republicans also are quick to point out that given the fact that tens of millions of dollars and nearly 2 years have been spent on this investigation, that the American public have a right to see these findings.
And the Attorney General, in his letter to Congress, is saying he remains committed to as much transparency as possible, tells the members of Congress, I'll keep you informed as to the status of my review. Pierre Thomas, we're learning a little bit more from the Department of Justice spokeswoman saying that basically this summary report by the Attorney General is done, or very close to it.
Very close to it. And one thing is clear from all of this is that Bob Mueller and Bill Barr, who've been friends for a very long time, have been consulting throughout this process. That while Barr did not have the complete report, obviously. He was briefed on it, as would be the responsibility of Mueller to let him know what the investigation had found, the final steps that were being taken. So Bob Mueller is not coming to this tonight from a standpoint of being in the dark. He has had a lot of information. He's been in the job roughly 3 weeks now, and I would dare say that he's been studying this very, very closely. The other thing that we should point out, George, is that so much of these indictments were often redacted, blacked out. There's just reams and reams of material that we never saw that will be in that confidential report that Barr is reviewing. We don't know what story that tells, and it'll be fascinating to see how much of any of it we find out. Some of it could involve classified information, counterintelligence information, and that will be part of the narrative that Congress will most undoubtedly want to see, George. And the other thing we have to be careful about, and we will ask the question tonight, is were there any indictments under seal that we don't know about that were not made public, George?
That is another big question. Dan Andrews, as we think about this report, both the summary that the Attorney General is going to write and whatever Robert Mueller sent him, a couple of things to keep in mind. The Ken Starr report, remember, from the Clinton days, several hundred pages long, likely not to see something like that. And what could cause things to be taken out of the public version of this report: executive privilege, national security concerns.
And potential grand jury information. I mean, those are three areas where you could have it removed. The interesting part of this report is going to be the reasons they decided not to prosecute. I mean, that's going to be part of the heart of this, because as we talked about, if the reason that they're not prosecuting is because he's the president, that's going to be something that Congress and the public are going to want to know, because they're going to want to know, okay, so if he wasn't the president, what do you have? What was the possible crime here? If, on the other hand, it was a decision based on the substance that said, we are not moving forward because there's just not enough evidence here, that's a very, very different thing. So that's going to be a very important thing to look for when we see anything that is made public.
And Chris Christie, one of the things the Democrats on Capitol Hill have said that the Department of Justice is on weak ground to deny giving out those underlying materials because of the release of several 100,000 pages of documents in the Hillary Clinton email case. At the same time, we also know that the former FBI Director James Comey was heavily criticized for going public with his criticism of Hillary Clinton when declining to prosecute.
Well, Comey was dead wrong for going public on the criticisms of Hillary Clinton. It's against Justice Department policy, and it significantly affected the national election. But in terms of the releasing of documents in the Hillary Clinton email investigation, that investigation was concluded, George. The reasons I think Bill Barr would hold things back, which Dan's talked about already, are because there's still ongoing investigations that this information could affect in some way. And so Bill Barr is going to look at this. He understands he's got to err on the side of transparency, given all of the public attention to this. But Bill Barr is going to make the determination based upon one simple principle. He is not going to do anything that impedes the administration of justice going forward. And that will be the way he's going to make that determination. I'm convinced of it. And I think that, you know, the bottom line here is that folks are going to have to, you know, just calm their curiosity a little while longer. Or, you know, if the Democrats don't like that, they can just close down the investigations in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere and have the report instead. But you can't have both.
Mary Bruce, we've already seen members of Congress, Democratic members of the House, Chairman Adam Schiff of the House Intelligence Committee say he expects to see that underlying information.
Yeah, and he points out that precedent that you were just discussing. He says that, look, when Republicans were in charge, they sought and obtained that underlying evidence regarding the Hillary Clinton email investigation. He's made very clear that he feels they are in solid standing here and that they're willing to go to court to resolve this issue. So you are seeing more and more Democrats backing that call. And, George, we have now heard a response from Chairman Nadler of the House Judiciary Committee. Of course, he's the powerful chairman of the committee where that does have power over the beginnings of any impeachment proceedings. And he says that they look forward to getting the full Mueller report and the related material, saying transparency and the public interest demand nothing less. But, George, getting that is going to be a huge, long fight up here, likely.
We're also getting a response from the president's former lawyer, Ty Cobb, who said Bob did his job, referring to Robert Mueller. He did it honorably. And this was the former counsel to the president, Ty Cobb. And I want to bring in Matthew Dowd. This is now moving we still have those courts that are working on the trials, the Southern District, Eastern, and Washington, D.C. as well. But this is moving largely into the political arena now. And you might have, it's conceivable, depending on what we finally learn from William Barr and Robert Mueller, a little bit switching sides. President Trump and his associates praising Robert Mueller, Democrats disappointed.
Well, yeah, I think, George, this is a key point, and as you and everybody else has laid out, as the former defense secretary used to talk about, which was this: we have a lot of known unknowns, which we still don't know what the report says. We still don't know what other court districts are going to do. We don't know all that, but I think this is a really, really key point in the process because largely it has been done in secret. Largely it has been done out of the public realm. But now it's being thrown in the midst of it's now the battles will become political. There may be continued legal issues, there may be others, but now it's going to be primarily political what they're about to face. And I actually think in this moment, the president's going to be on firmer standing in his world because the president has been boxing shadows for 2 years, almost his entire presidency. The president has been boxing these shadows of what might be in a Mueller report. Now it's going to come out. Now that part is done. Now he's going to be engaged in a political fight with Congress, with other folks. And so I think that this is an important date in the process because the president, for his entire presidency, this has been hanging over his head.
Key member of Congress on the phone right now, Eric Swalwell, Democrat, member of the House Intelligence Committee. Your initial reaction?
Hi, George. Also a member of the Judiciary Committee. And I can assure you that the American people will see every word, every comma, every period of this report. The president is outnumbered now. This is not, the minority that we were in over the last 2 years. We will subpoena for the report if they hold it back, and we have the precedence of the judiciary from the Nixon-Watergate litigation on our side.
Wouldn't it?
Well, I'm not promising we'll see it as fast as we want to see it, but we will see it. Again, we have a subpoena power we didn't have before. The American people wanted that balance of power on abuses of power, and we have a judiciary that I think firmly will be on our side.
So am I right to hear you're saying you're not accepting William Barr's summary conclusions as the final word?
No, and I also believe that we probably will have to hear from Bob Mueller. I think there will be skepticism about unless we see the full report, and Bob Mueller, is able to say that this is everything. There will be skepticism because of the way that acting attorney generals and even the way Mr. Barr came into the position, sending an unsolicited letter about the Mueller investigation. There is an asterisk around, the people who have led this investigation. Bob Mueller is not tainted in that way.
As far as we know, no further indictments, indictments for the underlying charge of whether anybody in President Trump's world conspired with the Russians to interfere in our election. If that indeed is the final conclusion of Robert Mueller, are you prepared to accept it?
I am prepared to accept Bob Mueller's report. Again, he can only prove, or he can only indict on what he can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. That doesn't mean that conduct didn't occur, and there's a difference. But what I will not accept is any criticism of the report by a person who did not go under oath, who was a subject of the investigation. So if the president did not subject himself to questioning, we don't want to hear from him because the state of the evidence will not include his testimony, while others did go under oath.
John, I want to bring in John. Thank you, Congressman. I want to bring in John Carl again. We heard Dan Abrams talk about this a bit, but one of the things that we've heard consistently from the Deputy Attorney General who appointed Robert Mueller, Rod Rosenstein, is that you have to be very careful about releasing negative information about people who aren't charged.
Absolutely. He has been emphatic that it is not the job of a prosecutor to disparage somebody who is not charged with a crime. So, George, what you will not see here is a repeat of what happened with Jim Comey and Hillary Clinton, where he came out and he announced at a big press conference that he was not indicting Hillary Clinton back in the summer of 2016, but then went on at some length criticizing her actions and her handling of her email as Secretary of State. You've seen people, there was a lot of speculation about Donald Trump Jr., about Jared Kushner, about the president himself, about others in his inner circle who have not been indicted by the special counsel. Based on what Rosenstein has said about this, I would not expect a report to come out and be harshly critical of them and then not lay out the case for an indictment. That is something Rosenstein has been explicit about. Prosecutors do not do that.
And for now, after 22 months, $25 million, three dozen indictments, Robert Mueller has completed his report. Excuse me, Cecilia, we just got something in from President Trump.
We did. It's all just breaking right now. George, our team is talking to sources who are speaking with the president, and they tell us that the president's initial reaction to today's news is glad it's over. He very much feels like, at least right now, this is case closed. But I think most of Washington probably feels like this is the end of the beginning. Not the beginning of the end, and that the assumption was that Robert Mueller would have the last word, that he would find one way or the other, that this was the president is implicated or not. I don't know that we can conclude that yet.
A lot more to learn. We could learn something as soon as this weekend, according to the Attorney General. May have his summary conclusions ready for Congress then. Robert Mueller has completed his report. The Attorney General will talk next. That is coming up sometime this weekend. Of course, we're going to have a full report on all of this tonight on World News Tonight with Dave Muir. That's coming up in just a little bit.
This has been a special report from ABC News.